The stage was dimly lit, but the tension was already blazing. The show's host barely got through his opening line when Denzel leaned forward in his chair, eyes locked on Senator Tim Scott. The live audience, sensing the storm brewing, went utterly silent. "You say America's not a racist country," Denzel said, his tone sharp but composed. "But tell me, how do you explain George Floyd? Breonna Taylor? The endless list that seems to grow year after year?" Tim Scott, dressed in a crisp suit and wearing his signature stoic expression, didn't flinch. "What happened to George Floyd was wrong," he said. "But acknowledging a tragedy doesn't mean branding an entire country as racist." Denzel chuckled, but it wasn't from amusement. "No, Senator. What's tragic is thinking you can amputate history and still walk straight. Racism isn't a headline, it's a system." The moderator tried to interject, but neither man broke their gaze. Denzel leaned in further. "You keep saying opportunity exists for all. Tell that to the mother working 2 jobs whose son gets followed in a store. Tell it to the kid in Baltimore who's never seen a college recruiter step foot on his block." Tim's reply was firm, almost rehearsed. "We have problems, Denzel. But blaming everything on racism is not only inaccurate, it's dangerous. It divides. It wounds deeper." Denzel's voice dropped to a low, deliberate tone. "You can't heal what you deny. And you, sir, have become a spokesperson for denial." A murmur swept through the audience. Tim straightened in his chair. "That's a cheap shot." "No," Denzel said calmly. "It's a mirror." The camera zoomed in on both men as the silence hung heavy, cut only by the show's theme music gently fading to commercial. But everyone knew, this was far from over. As soon as the show returned from commercial break, the air in the studio felt even thicker. The host looked hesitant, unsure whether to mediate or step back and let the titans clash. Tim Scott was the first to speak this time. "You keep throwing labels, Denzel. But where's your solution? You say I'm in denial, but I've lived it. I've been pulled over for no reason. I've been followed in stores. I've felt the sting of it. But I refuse to let that define me, or this country." Denzel nodded slowly. "You felt it, and still think it's an exception, not the rule? I know what progress looks like. My very position proves it." "No," Denzel cut in, "your position proves the system needs someone like you to say that. To make people comfortable. To sell the illusion that the job's done." Tim's jaw clenched. "You think I'm a prop?" "I think you're more than that," Denzel said evenly. "But I also think you've let yourself be used." A soft gasp rippled through the audience. Tim leaned forward now. "You sit there, a millionaire actor, telling me I've been used? You play characters. I live this." Denzel didn't blink. "And I talk to people who don't get to sit in a senator's seat. I listen to the ones you don't hear. And they're telling me they're tired of pain being politicized, or worse, ignored." Tim's voice rose. "Tired of pain being politicized? That's all you're doing. You're weaponizing it. Making it theatrical." Denzel leaned back, calm but burning. "No, Senator. I'm making it visible. The problem isn't that I raise my voice, the problem is that too many stay quiet and call it strength." The host tried once again to chime in but stopped. This was no longer a debate. It was a collision of philosophies. "Maybe," Tim said, his voice quieter now, "we're both trying to heal something." "Maybe," Denzel said, "but one of us is treating the wound, and the other's still pretending it doesn't bleed." A wave of murmurs and head shaking rippled through the audience. And just like that, the battle lines were drawn even deeper. The camera panned slowly across the audience, eyes wide, hands clasped, jaws clenched. They weren't watching a debate anymore. They were watching something crack open. Denzel adjusted his mic and looked directly at Tim. "You know what gets me, Senator? The way you talk about America, it's like an idea, not a place. But where I come from, it's a place that calls the cops on you for existing too loud." Tim raised an eyebrow. And where I come from, people fought to make sure we could sit here and disagree, on national television. That's progress, even if you refuse to see it. Denzel shook his head. That's a set piece. Symbolism. A photo op. Real progress is when a black kid doesn't have to out-achieve everyone just to be seen as equal. Not exceptional. Just equal. Tim's voice dropped. So what's your answer, then? Burn it all down? Dismantle the system with sound bites and viral clips? No, Denzel said. I want accountability. And I want truth. You don't fight fire with tweets. But you don't put it out by pretending it's a candle either. The host attempted a light-hearted interjection. Gentlemen, maybe we can meet in the middle? Neither man moved. Tim turned to Denzel. I refuse to stand on a stage and tell black Americans they're broken. And I refuse to stand here and tell them they're healed, Denzel replied without missing a beat. The crowd murmured again. One woman nodded. A man in the back stood up, then sat back down, visibly shaken. Denzel's voice softened, but only in volume. When I say you deny pain, I don't mean you don't feel it. I mean you've built a career out of minimizing it for applause. Tim looked stunned for a moment. Then he said coldly, You're an actor. You read scripts. I write laws. Denzel smirked. And I bury friends you write laws about. The room went absolutely still. The host looked at the producers, unsure if they should cut to commercial. But the audience wasn't ready to look away. Not yet. Do you hear yourself? Tim finally asked, eyes narrowing. You think you're speaking truth, but all I hear is rage dressed up as righteousness. Denzel didn't flinch. Sometimes rage is the only language left when truth's been ignored for too long. Tim leaned forward, voice firm. I don't ignore truth. I live it. I know what poverty looks like. I know what a broken school system feels like. I know the face of violence. But I also know the danger of telling people they're powerless. No, Denzel shot back, the danger is telling them they're empowered when nothing has changed. That's psychological warfare. That's the lie we feed the hurting so they stop asking why they're still hurting. The audience erupted into mixed reactions, applause, gasps, and murmurs clashing in the air. Tim stood now, breaking the seated tension. And what's your answer, Denzel? More outrage? More division? I'm not dividing, Denzel replied as he slowly rose to meet Tim eye to eye. I'm exposing the cracks in a house you keep painting over. A house that leaks trauma and mold and you call it a home. Tim's fists tightened at his sides. I fight for unity. You fight for comfort, Denzel said, almost whispering now. There's a difference. The host finally stood, attempting to step between them. Let's take a breath. This isn't a courtroom. But maybe it should be, Denzel interrupted. Because people have been sentenced to silence for too long. The lights above dimmed slightly, not intentionally, just a shift in atmosphere, as if the set itself was absorbing the weight of the moment. Tim broke eye contact first. And Denzel's final words in that moment pierced through the noise like a blade. If your unity requires silence, it's not unity. It's surrender. Tim straightened his suit, breathing sharply through his nose. You know, I expected disagreement. But I didn't expect condescension. Denzel crossed his arms. You call it condescension. I call it confrontation. There's a difference. The audience leaned in again, drawn, magnetized. Tim spoke slower now, measuring every word. You think I've betrayed something. Maybe because I don't scream at the system, you think I joined it. But I didn't. I navigated it. Survived it. That's strength. Denzel nodded slightly. It is. But strength without reflection becomes arrogance. And arrogance writes speeches while ignoring statistics. The screen behind them lit up suddenly, highlighting incarceration rates, wage gaps, education disparities. Numbers that didn't care about party lines. Denzel turned to the data, then back to Tim. Those aren't opinions. That's not performance. That's pain on a pie chart. Tim bit his lip, visibly trying not to react. What do you want me to say? Denzel stepped forward. I want you to stop sugarcoating suffering to keep your approval ratings high. I want you to stop asking people to be patient while nothing changes. And what do you want instead? Tim asked. Riots? Revolutions? I want reality, Denzel said, his voice hardening. And I want leaders who don't sell inspiration while buying silence. The host tried to jump in again. Gentlemen, let's. Denzel raised a hand, not to silence the host, but to center the room. I didn't come here for applause. I came here because I'm tired of being told that the trauma I carry is a talking point. It's not. Tim exhaled deeply, clearly rattled. You act like you own pain. I don't, Denzel replied. But I refuse to let you rent it out for sound bites. The words landed like thunder. The audience didn't cheer this time. They just sat, still, quiet, changed. Tim Scott leaned forward, finally shedding the polished tone. You think you're the only one who's tired, Denzel? I've spent decades fighting to be taken seriously by both sides, walking into rooms where I'm either too black or not black enough. You ever carry that weight? Denzel didn't flinch. Every day. But the difference is, I didn't let that weight turn me into a mascot. Gasps broke out across the studio. The moderator looked visibly stunned, his hand hovering over his earpiece. A producer's voice could be heard faintly, don't cut. Let it roll. Tim's eyes burned. You call me a mascot, but I'm the one writing legislation while you give speeches on red carpets. Denzel walked slowly to the center of the stage. You mistake the stage for vanity. I use the mic because you won't use the pen to tell the truth. The tension was electric now. People at home weren't just watching, they were sitting forward, phones in hand, recording screens. I don't hide from truth, Tim fired back. But I don't exploit it either. You sanitize it, Denzel countered. You wrap trauma in digestible slogans. You call centuries of injustice a policy flaw. That's not leadership, that's PR. The screen behind them flickered again, this time showing footage from a protest in Charleston, tear gas, knees and backs, a mother screaming for her son. Denzel turned to the image. You say things have changed. That video's from 2 weeks ago. Tim looked at the screen, then away. Denzel stepped closer. You asked if I carried the weight. I do. But I never asked people to pretend the floor wasn't cracking beneath them just because I found a way to stand. Silence. Then, a voice from the crowd, say it again. Denzel didn't repeat. He didn't need to. The moment Denzel leaned in, his voice slowed down, not in weakness, but in deliberate control. You know what's worse than hate, Senator, he said, staring at Tim Scott across the table. Silence. That polished, comfortable, well-spoken silence you've mastered. That, right there, is the betrayal that cuts deeper than any slur. The studio was dead quiet. Scott shifted slightly, trying to keep his composure, but the words had struck a nerve. That's unfair, he said, blinking hard. Just because I don't scream doesn't mean I'm silent. I work within the system to fix it. Denzel nodded slowly. Work within it? Brother, the system was built to break us. And while you're sitting politely inside, folks out there are bleeding. I'm not asking you to scream. I'm asking you to stop pretending pain is too political to touch. The camera panned to the moderator, whose face was frozen in disbelief. She started to interject, but Denzel didn't stop. He was in motion now, his voice not raised, but unshakably firm. You said earlier that you want to bring everyone together. Let me ask you this, how do you bring people together when one side is drowning and the other's holding the hose? You can't unify injustice. You have to confront it. Scott finally stood up, adjusting his tie like he needed a break from the weight in the room. You talk like it's either march or nothing, he shot back. Like building doesn't matter. But I have fought for reforms. I've sat at tables you've never seen. Denzel stood too, slow and steady. Tables that serve what, Tim? A cold plate of compromise? While mothers bury sons and schools erase history, you're worried about your seat at the dinner party? A few gasps echoed in the room. No applause. No reactions. Just stunned silence. Then Tim's jaw clenched. I fight differently than you. That doesn't make me less black or less real. Denzel's expression softened, just for a second, but his words stayed sharp. It's not about being black, Tim. It's about being brave. And sometimes, bravery means losing invites, losing donors, losing applause. I've lost all of that. But I sleep at night. He turned slightly toward the crowd. The scariest thing in the world isn't hate. It's comfort in the face of injustice. The audience sat frozen, eyes wide, waiting, either for the moderator to cut to break, or for Tim Scott to fire back. But nothing came. Just the sound of a heartbeat in the silence. Tim Scott finally broke the silence, not with fire, but with something colder, calculation. If you think scorched earth speeches and moral shaming are how you fix a nation, he said, adjusting his jacket, then maybe you're not trying to fix it. Maybe you just want to win arguments. Denzel didn't flinch. Arguments don't interest me, Senator. Truth does. And what you call strategy, we call delay. We've been told to wait for centuries. And every delay has cost us something, our homes, our dignity, our lives. A few members of the audience clapped, unsure if it was the right time. The air in the room crackled, not with noise, but with the kind of tension that makes people lean in without realizing. Scott stepped forward, lowering his voice. You think I haven't bled for this country? You think I haven't heard the slurs, faced the doors that never opened? Denzel nodded slowly. I'm sure you have. But what matters isn't what you survived, it's what you do with that survival. You were given a mic. You chose to speak in riddles. When the people needed clarity, you gave them comfort. Scott's jaw tightened again, but he didn't interrupt. Denzel continued, there's a difference between making people feel safe and making them face the truth. You've built a brand on saying, we're better than this. But we're not. Not yet. And we never will be if men like you keep saying what polls well instead of what bleeds real. The camera zoomed in on Tim's face. A flicker of something, doubt? Guilt? Maybe just exhaustion. You know, Tim said, looking directly at Denzel now, when I started, I thought if I showed them I was different, they'd listen. I wore the suit. I lowered my tone. I gave speeches that wouldn't scare white donors. I smiled through it all. He paused. And they still call me a token. Denzel blinked. There it was. A crack in the armor. Then stop being one, Denzel said. Not cruel. Not loud. Just real. The room went dead silent. It was the first time Tim didn't speak back. Instead, he sat down. And for a moment, it wasn't a debate, it was a reckoning. Not just for Scott, but for every viewer watching. Whoever confused survival with silence, Tim Scott sat back, eyes lowered, not in defeat, but in deep, visible conflict. For the first time, he wasn't reciting party lines or polished rhetoric. He looked like a man suddenly unsure of the foundation he'd built his entire career on. Denzel stepped forward, but not to gloat. He didn't raise his voice or deliver a cinematic monologue. Instead, he spoke with clarity, each word landing like a steady heartbeat. This isn't about you, Tim, he said quietly. It's bigger than that. It's about the next generation watching this moment and deciding whether it's worth telling the truth out loud. Tim slowly raised his head, eyes meeting Denzel's. You think I don't carry that weight? He asked. You think I don't feel the pressure of representing an entire race every time I open my mouth on that Senate floor? I know you do, Denzel replied. But representation without truth is just decoration. And I'm not asking you to burn bridges, I'm asking you to stop pretending those bridges weren't built on broken backs. The moderator, still frozen in her seat, finally leaned forward. Do either of you think this conversation will change anything? Denzel turned to her. It already has. Because we're having it. In a room like this. In front of people who've been told not to ask these questions out loud. Scott shook his head, still visibly torn. If I go back to Washington and say what you're saying, I lose everything. Maybe, Denzel said. But maybe you gain something too. Maybe, for the first time, they'll actually hear you as a man, not just a mouthpiece. The audience began to shift, quiet murmurs, nodding heads, a feeling that something had cracked open. Not with applause, not with spectacle, but with truth. Denzel walked back to his seat, but before sitting, turned once more to Scott. You say you want healing. I say you can't heal what you won't name. Scott didn't argue. He just sat there, shoulders lowered, eyes full of weight. A man who came to debate, but instead met himself. And the audience? They didn't cheer. They just listened. And in that silence, something shifted. The room didn't erupt in standing ovation. There were no teary hugs or orchestrated reconciliations. What lingered was heavier, more honest, a silence that demanded reflection. It was the kind of silence you could feel press against your skin, the kind that doesn't ask for reaction but insists on reckoning. Tim Scott didn't leave the stage immediately. He stayed seated, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together like a man on the edge of a decision. Denzel, standing quietly behind his chair, waited, not as a victor, but as someone offering a door, not pushing one shut. Finally, Tim stood. His voice, when it came, was subdued but resolute. I've spent a lot of my life trying to prove I belonged. In rooms like this. At tables like those. He nodded toward the moderator. But tonight, I heard something I haven't let myself hear in years, something I buried under policies, polling, and punditry. He turned to Denzel. You didn't come here to destroy me. You came here to demand more of me. Denzel nodded. Because I know there's more. The moderator, sensing the shift, tried to steer the moment into closure. Senator Scott, will you reconsider your stance on race and public policy? He didn't answer with a soundbite. I'll reconsider everything, he said. Because if I don't, then what am I even doing up there? And just like that, the lights dimmed. The segment was over. Cameras cut. The control room's voice echoed, "We're clear." But the moment wasn't. As staff began to disperse, Denzel and Tim remained. No more performance, no more audience, just two men standing in the echo of their words. You think anything changes after this? Tim asked, eyes searching. I don't know, Denzel said. But I know nothing changes without moments like this. Outside the studio, trending topics exploded. Hashtags like hashtag Denzel vs. Scott, hashtag Truth First, and hashtag You Can't Heal What You Deny climbed the charts. Commentators fumbled to control the narrative, but the audience had already decided, this wasn't just a debate. It was a turning point. Back inside, Denzel grabbed his coat, nodded respectfully to Tim, and walked off set. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't angry. He was steady. Because truth doesn't need applause. It just needs someone brave enough to say it when the cameras are still rolling. This wasn't just a debate. It was a reckoning. Denzel Washington didn't speak to win, he spoke to wake up a room that's been too comfortable with silence. Tim Scott was forced to confront more than just policy, he had to confront himself. In the end, no one walked away untouched. Truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it just refuses to stay buried. What side of history are you standing on? Drop your thoughts below and don't forget to subscribe.